Well, it's been labeled the big lie, the idea that Donald Trump actually won the 2020 election thanks to voter fraud and the attempts by the left to create an almost global conspiracy to deny him the presidency. The folks who suggest that Donald Trump won the 2020 election, one of the reasons they suggest that is because they say, well, the left had the motive, the means, and the opportunity. And that is the argument that I have heard. And it is the strongest argument that they make, because the truth is that there's no way to prove that Donald Trump actually won the 2020 election based on the vote count. There's no way to actually show that fraudulent voters were present in the sort of numbers that would have overturned the results in many of these states. The best that you can say in favor of the idea that the 2020 election was rigged is that it was sort of informally and generically rigged, in the sense that the media denied people the access to the information that would have needed to change their votes, in the sense that the rules were actively changed, in some cases, like in Pennsylvania, against the Constitution of the state of Pennsylvania, in order to make it easier for people to vote absentee. It's possible to say that ballot harvesting creates the massive possibility of voter fraud. Right? All of those things can be true. The actual notion that Donald Trump won based on he definitely had enough falsified ballots that he could have proved, or that ballots we can show were shipped in the middle of the night and people were in the back room punching holes in the chads, that sort of proof wasn't present. But the argument that is the most, I think, strong and convincing from the right, from those who argue this point of view, if you're trying to steel man the argument, is that the left has the motive, means, and the opportunity to steal elections, and so why wouldn't they? And the idea here is that they had the means, right? The means would be, the broadening of the voting procedures and the ballot harvesting. They had the opportunity because people were voting for months in advance, and they had the motive. And the motive is really, I think, the thing that people are latching onto. The motive is really what is driving polarization in our politics, because it used to be when people say, why don't people accept the results of elections anymore? And this is bipartisan. Why don't people accept the results of elections anymore? The answer is because it used to be in this country that you would suggest, no matter how much I hate the other guy, I don't have the motive to steal an election. Right? To steal an election means that I truly believe that the country is at an end if we don't steal this election. If I don't subvert the democracy, then the democracy is gone. Right? The argument in favor of subverting a democratic election is, if I don't do this, catastrophe occurs. And you can see times in human history where that argument could be made. The communists are about to take over in a particular place, and so the CIA has to get involved to prevent Stalin from taking over Italy. Right? That argument was made in the 1950s, for example. Right? You could make the argument with regard to Hitler. Hitler's about to take over in Germany. You do everything you possibly can to stop Hitler from taking over in Germany. If you have a time machine, right? Any means at your disposal is useful and good, because after all, he's Hitler. But what has separated America historically from all of this is the idea that if the guy from the other party gets elected, it's bad, it's unpleasant, it's really bad for the direction of the country. Politics has consequences, but it is not so bad that you have the motive to steal the election. You wouldn't have the motive to undermine an election itself, to destroy election integrity. Increasingly, as we have seen in recent years, the feeling on both sides of the aisle, but particularly on the left side of the aisle, is that anything necessary in order to prevent Republicans from gaining power is justified. Republicans are evil. Republicans are terrorists. Republicans are the worst people in the entire world. Donald Trump is Orange Hitler and all the rest. And if we have to subvert elections by suppressing information, then we will. And so what that leads is people on the right to say, okay, well, obviously you have the motive to do this. So if I thought you had the means and the opportunity, I think you would probably do it, right? Okay, so this comes to a head thanks to some comments made by somebody I'm friendly with, Sam Harris. So Sam Harris is a pretty interesting thinker. He's one of the new atheist crew. He's written all of these books about how atheism is morally superior and about how truth is the most important value. And Sam and I have had a couple of podcasts together. I had him on the Sunday Special a few years back. He had me on his show. We debated things like God and free will. It was really interesting sort of stuff. Sam is very much of the left. Right? He's definitely a Democrat voting person. And apparently he believes, and this is why this is so telltale, because Sam is not a wild leftist. Sam is not somebody who is a radically left person. Sam tends to be left of center on a lot of issues, but he's not somebody who I would characterize as like a woke radical leftist or something. That's not, he actually is not. So he was on a podcast called Triggernometry, and he made some comments that I think totally throw gasoline on the flaming, raging fire of election denial and on the raging fire that's going on in terms of polarization in the country. The belief that there are, in fact, people who are willing to create conspiracies in order to deny the proper results of an election, or even willing to subvert elections entirely. Now, Sam tried to walk this back yesterday a little bit on Twitter. I don't think he did a very good job of it, but these comments went viral for a reason. because they support the idea that so many people have about people on the left. That people on the left, if they had the chance, would steal an election from Donald Trump. So here is Sam Harris a couple of days ago on Triggernometry. Again, this went totally viral yesterday.
I mean, Hunter Biden, at that point, Hunter Biden literally could have had the corpses of children in his basement. I would not have cared, right? It's like, there's nothing. First of all, it's Hunter Biden, right? It's not Joe Biden. But even if whatever scope of Joe Biden's corruption is, like if we could just go down that rabbit hole endlessly and understand that he's getting kickbacks from Hunter Biden's deals in Ukraine or wherever else, right? Or China. It is infinitesimal compared to the corruption we know Trump is involved in. It's like a firefly to the sun, right? I mean, like there's just it doesn't even stack up against Trump University, right? Trump University as a story is worse than anything that could be in Hunter Biden's laptop, in my view, right? Now that doesn't answer the people who say it's still completely unfair to not have looked at the laptop in a timely way and to have shut down the New York Post's Twitter account. Like that's just a conspiracy. That's a left-wing conspiracy to deny the presidency to Donald Trump. Absolutely, it was. Absolutely, right? But I think it was warranted, right? And again, it's a coin toss as to whether or not
Sam, I'm sorry.
That particular piece.
I'm really sorry. I was the one that said we should move on, but you've just said
it.
something I really struggle with there, which is
the kids in the basement.
No. The kids in the basement. I'm interested in democracy. You're saying you are content with a left-wing conspiracy to prevent somebody being democratically re-elected as president.
Well, no, I'm content. Well, but the thing is, it's just not left-wing, right? So Liz Cheney is not left-wing, right? Liz Cheney is doing everything in her power.
You're content with a conspiracy to prevent somebody being democratically elected.
But there's nothing conspiracy. It's not. It was a conspiracy out in the open. But it doesn't matter if it was. It doesn't matter what part's conspiracy, what part's out in the open. I mean, I think it's like if people get together and talk about what should we do about this phenomenon. If there was an asteroid hurtling toward Earth, and we got in a room together with all of our friends and had a conversation about what we could do to deflect its course, right? Is that a conspiracy?
I mean, that's an amazing statement there from Sam Harris. So he openly says, okay, so there are people who are complaining that the Hunter Biden laptop story was suppressed by the media, right? So he's not even talking right now about election fraud. He's talking about what sort of information could and should be suppressed in order to effectuate an election win for Joe Biden. And he even says, what if on that laptop had been the stuff that a lot of right-wingers suspect about Joe Biden, which is that he was getting direct kickbacks from Hunter Biden for corrupt activities in Ukraine and China, right? Because that is the gravest accusation on the laptop. Forget about Hunter Biden smoking crack off hookers' asses and all the rest. The stuff that people really are concerned about with regard to Joe Biden is not the fact that Hunter Biden is a drug-addicted derelict and a horrible person. The thing that people are really concerned about in terms of the presidency is, was Hunter Biden traveling overseas to China, receiving massive amounts of money from the Chinese government, and then kicking back 10% to the big guy being Joe, right? That would actually be really troubling, because that would be significantly worse than anything that was even proved about Donald Trump, right? Like way worse. That was the actual accusation about Trump. The accusation about Trump was that Trump was in thrall to the Russians, that Trump had basically made a trade with the Russians, that they would subvert the election, and in return, he would be really, really nice to them, because if they did that, then they would also greenlight the Trump Hotel in Moscow. Or that he had a deal with Deutsche Bank, some financial deal that would allow some sort of kickback where he was being enriched personally by the Russians in order to effectuate different American policy toward Russia. Right? That was the accusation about Trump. It was never proved. Nothing of that kind was ever really even alleged by the Mueller report. All of it ended up being bullcrap. But what he's saying, what Sam Harris is saying, is even if that stuff were true about Joe Biden and China, or Joe Biden and Ukraine, if it turned out that Joe Biden is everything we said Donald Trump was, but could never prove, that still would not justify allowing information to flow freely to the American people. It would not allow people to see that information because it's so important to stop Trump, right? Trump is so bad. He's an asteroid hurtling toward Earth that it doesn't matter what you have to do to stop that asteroid. It doesn't matter if you call it a conspiracy, not a conspiracy. None of that matters. The idea here is that you have to mold the minds of the American people to prevent Donald Trump from being president of the United States. Now, Sam Harris tried to then walked this back a little bit on Twitter, and I want to be fair to Sam by reading what he actually said here. He says, there's a podcast clip circulating that seems to be confusing many people about my views on Trump, which is understandable because I wasn't speaking very clearly. So for what it's worth, here's what I was trying to say. I was essentially arguing for a principle of self-defense, where there's a continuum of proportionate force that is appropriate and necessary to use. I've always viewed Trump as a very dangerous person to elect as president of a fake university, let alone the United States. And when he became a sitting president who would not commit to a peaceful transfer of power, I viewed him as more dangerous still. However, I've never been under any illusion that he is Orange Hitler. On the podcast, I was speaking narrowly about the wisdom and propriety of ignoring the Hunter Biden laptop story until after the election. I've always thought that this was a very hard call, ethically and journalistically. Now, right there, he gives away the game. What makes that a hard call, ethically and journalistically? And why? Again, he says in the clip, what he's saying is it doesn't matter how corrupt Joe Biden is. He could be any level of corrupt, right? On Hunter Biden's laptop could have been proof, direct, that Xi Jinping sent hookers, blow, and $10 million directly to Joe, not Hunter. And that would have been worthy of ignoring because that's how bad Donald Trump was and how scary Donald Trump was. He says it's a hard call ethically and journalistically, but given what happened with the Anthony Weiner laptop in the previous election, I think it was probably the right call. So again, that's an amazing statement because what happened, if you recall, in the last election cycle is that there were serious questions about how Hillary Clinton had treated classified information as Secretary of State. And she had stored a bunch of classified information on her laptop. And then when she was subpoenaed for all this information, she bleach bit her servers and destroyed all the information. And Anthony Weiner's laptop, in a separate investigation of Anthony Weiner, came up, and a bunch of Hillary's emails basically found their way onto Anthony Weiner's laptop because, after all, he was married to Huma Abedin. Huma Abedin was very close with Hillary Clinton. She was one of her top aides. And so he's saying that because the Anthony Weiner laptop story ended up effectuating a move toward Donald Trump in the last days of the 2016 election, and so Donald Trump ended up winning, it would have been better that story were suppressed. Right? This story should be suppressed. That story should have been suppressed. And note, he's saying that before Donald Trump had been president. So the notion that between 2016 and 2020, Trump proved himself to be so dangerous, it was about election denial, that he proved himself so dangerous in July, August, September, October of 2020, that you could not allow him to remain as president of the United States. It's not about that. Sam is openly saying now that he, if he had a choice, would go back and have suppressed the Anthony Weiner laptop information. That's 2016, before Trump has done any of this kind of stuff. He says, nothing I said on the podcast was meant to suggest that Democrats would have been right to commit election fraud or to take other illegal measures to deny Trump the presidency, nor do I think they did that. But I don't know why the principle doesn't hold. So according to Sam Harris, there's a continuum. The continuum goes from suppressing open stories by the New York Post that affect the election to openly just shoving fake ballots into boxes. He says, I'm not going to do the latter thing, but suppressing the former thing, that I'm kind of okay with. And I'm kind of okay with to deny Trump the presidency. But here's the problem. Once you're on that continuum, that's not just a slippery slope. You're going to have to explain the principle. Why is Donald Trump so dangerous that you can shut down the ability of people to distribute true information about Joe Biden in order to prevent Joe Biden from losing? But he's not dangerous enough that you're actually willing to stuff ballot boxes. Like, explain to me how that continuum works. Sam says it's a continuum. So how does that continuum work? So a lot of conservatives suspect there is no continuum. A lot of conservatives suspect that this is completely ad hoc. That if in the secret recesses of the Democratic halls of power, they had the ability to actually stuff ballot boxes, they would do it. And that if you're openly saying, if the part you say out loud is, I'm willing to shut down the New York Post distribution of Hunter Biden stories, the stuff that you're really saying in the back of your mind is pretty much anything that we have to do to deny Donald Trump the presidency, we are willing to do. So why should I believe you when you say that the election was carried out in fair and decent fashion? And that is the thinking of a lot of people on the right side of the aisle. Now, again, that doesn't prove that the election was stolen. It proves motive. It doesn't prove means and opportunity. And it certainly doesn't prove that it actually even happened. Because, again, the states that we are talking about that actually certified their ballots were all run by Republicans, right? You had a Republican legislature in Pennsylvania. You had a Republican legislature in Arizona and a Republican Secretary of State, and a Republican Secretary of State in Georgia and a Republican governor. Also in Arizona, you had a Republican governor, right? So like the notion that that the mere presence of the motive proves that the thing happened is not true. And many people have terrible, terrible motives with regard to other people. It doesn't prove that they committed any crime against that person. However, it's the motive that is really undergirding the complete separation in the United States, the complete polarization in the United States. And that lack of trust is tearing us apart on an institutional level. Tearing us apart because you believe the minute that guy gets access to the levers of power, you know what he thinks. You know his motive. So if he gains access to the sword, what you suspect is that he's going to use it. Right? And that's incredibly dangerous. That's why people are so fired up, for example, about the FBI raid. Because the idea here is we know that you guys hate Donald Trump. We know you despise him. We know that you spent 4 years going after him for a bunch of garbage with regard to Russia. And now you have control of that sword again. So why should we believe you that you are using that in fair fashion when you've made very clear that you don't wish to use that in fair fashion? People have these suspicions about, for example, big tech. And they should have those suspicions about big tech. All right, Sam Harris said the quiet part out loud, and even his attempts to walk it back are not really strong enough. Because the moment that you say information should be suppressed so my guy can win, the question becomes, okay, what else are you willing to do so that your guy can win? And why do you draw this line, but not that line? And also, why should we believe you? I mean, you've now openly said that you're willing to be dishonest in order to ensure that your candidate wins. So why should we believe that you're not being dishonest when you say stuff you won't do? Right? When you say, yeah, I'm willing to cheat with regard to this thing, but over here, that's too much cheating for me. Why should I believe you? You've now said that you're willing to cheat. So why you're talking to me, right? You're not talking in the recesses with your friends. So why? That motive question is so dangerous in America. One thing that I really despise in American politics, and it happens again on both sides a lot, is what we call emotivism. Emotivism is the idea that somebody makes an argument, and instead of you arguing with the argument, you argue with the motive of the argument. You attribute a motive to the person, and then you argue with the motive. You see this happen all the time in, for example, gender ideology. You see it happen, Matt Walsh, when he did his fantastic documentary, What is a Woman? He would go around and he would ask a bunch of gender theorists, what is a woman? And their first question back to him would be, why are you asking? Why are you asking? Right? They don't want to engage with the question or the argument. And so they go immediately to, you're malicious. You're bad. Your motives are evil. Right? I don't like that kind of politics. I think that kind of politics generally stinks. I think politics should be about the argument itself. But when you make clear the motive, when you say the motive out loud, now it's about your motives. I mean, it's not my fault. You're the one who made it about your motives. When Sam Harris says, yeah, my motive is I am willing to suppress information to prevent Donald Trump from winning. And I think that's an easy moral call because Trump University is worse than if Joe Biden took cash from China. Like, first of all, what? Then at that point, it is your motive that's on the table. And once the motives are on the table, very difficult to put that genie back in the bottle. How's this for a title? Ben Shapiro Show subscriber destroys like button with clicks and logic. I'd watch that. Make it happen, gang.